Hello. Hello. Welcome to Japanese and Me for the Future. And this is a technically kind of a response video and update video to my previous um video that I made called just Japanese and Me, but this is not a direct sequel and you do not need to watch the first one to understand this one. Instead, this video is more so just kind of, I think, summarizing that first video and then adding some more things because things have already changed. And I'll start with just saying that in that first video, um, I talked a lot about. I feel like I was fairly optimistic, I want to say. I was fairly. I'm not. Okay. That sounds like I'm like quit Japanese or something. That's not true either. It's actually, I think there were some things that weren't completed in that video at all. Watch it if you want, although do know that I think this video kind of triumphs it, or is going to triumph it in a lot of my opinions. I'll start summarizing it just in that now my the goals with my what I want to do with my Japanese have changed. In the first video, I started off with the claim that I do consider myself fluent in Japanese, and that is because I can understand and say pretty much anything I need to. It is something I consider. This is the wrong chest. It's something I consider myself. I'm pretty proud about actually, and it's something that I'm very close to my identity with how I learn Japanese, and it is something that kind of also like motivates me to stop learning Japanese because what's the point anymore, you know? And what that puts me at to now is just like it's a lot there's a lot of like what is again what I said before of just like what is the point of me learning Japanese anymore if I'm already know everything or I know what I can probably do. But I also said in that video that I lack the ability to there's like a second like tier of fluency that I can't do, and it's essentially what I briefly touched on it in that video, but I call it emotional fluency. I'm very technically good at Japanese. I can again I can understand and say anything I need to say, but I oftentimes struggle in more quicker situations. I oftentimes struggle in more like something more like that actually has like meaning to it. I guess it's just I can technically understand what it means, but it doesn't mean anything if I don't have the experiences to go with it. And that's really the important part about that. I used the example in the first video of haha ga shinda, which means my mom died. And if you don't know Japanese, that probably sounds like complete nonsense. Haha ga shinda, it just sounds like noise. But and even if I told you that it technically does mean my mom died, it still probably doesn't send. You might technically know that's like okay, that means my mom died, but like you don't. It doesn't like send you any chills. It doesn't. You don't feel anything. I guess is what the thesis of the purpose of emotional understanding is that you need to feel something. And as a matter of fact, I remember I was watching an anime after I made that video actually, the first video, and it was essentially I remember there was when I was in Japan, I had a friend ask me like, "Oh, nomu, just nomu," like which means you need a drink in the context I was in. And we were at a vending machine, and we were like, "Oh, nomu, are you thirsty?" And I remember I was so not used to like I felt so not used to people asking me for like being nice like that, which is kind of sad. I have like avoidant tendencies, but that's a completely other different story. But I'm not nice or used to people like being just genuinely nice to me like that, so I took it like so significantly. And I remember I was watching an anime, and then someone just asked the characters like, "Oh, Nomu," and I remember I felt what I felt back then, which I think is kind of just mean does actually mean something. in terms of like what I kind of mean by emotional understanding. It's not just, but it is also does play into a technical understanding too, because emotional understanding actually helps your technical understanding. Emotional understanding can like I did not talk about this in my first video literally at all, by the way. This is completely new stuff. Emotional understanding is important to being able to get out of the fatigue trap, in my opinion, because if you're really technically good, you can I can speak Japanese. I can say anything I don't need to say, but eventually when I was in Japan, as my friend noted, I got fatigued very fast. And I started to stop really speaking Japanese at all, very well at all. And part of my reasoning for that, as why that happened, was because I don't really have the emotional understanding to just kind of back on to just have my emotions react. Because if I'm under the current state of just using my technical ability, I was basically like doing math problems all day. And yes, I got sick of doing that. I couldn't do what I actually just wanted to do. It's kind of a good thing to say is like, I understand why babies cry now. Because like when they run out of any technical ability that they've learned to communicate what they think, they cry because it's the only other way they know how to communicate just their pure emotions, because they haven't learned how to communicate, translate emotions to just saying a word without like freaking out about it. They haven't learned that civility yet, or a way of being civil yet, which I think is really important to learning Japanese, or really any language. You have to have that level of civility. I don't even know if that's a word, civility, but yeah. And that's like kind of what I sought after but mostly what I was explaining is I kind of want that that new like emotional ability that actually also improved my technical ability a lot. I wanted to be able to get to that place so I can pass stuff like the N1, and also make it easier for me to pass something like the N1, and also open up doors in Japan and open up more like opportunities, because I also mentioned in that video like I don't really want to move to Japan. A lot of my core motivations have kind of gone away with Japan. Like I'm not super into anime. I'm not like as much of a weeb I used to be, I guess. So it's like I've kind of like slowly, I guess, transformed into just a normal person, and that made it so that it was like that was contributing to like I just don't do Japanese anymore, because I feel like I already know what I need to know and I don't even care anymore. But like to me, Japanese has become something a little bit more personal, which is why I named this video Japanese and Me, because it is personal. It is personal to me. It is what I kind of value with Japanese. What my reasonings for keep on going have gone kind of surpassed, I think, reasons that most people would relate to, or at least not most people, maybe some Japanese learners, but like from an outside perspective, what people would relate to. So that's pretty important. I I also mentioned I wanted to stop because I feel like if I would just basically be gaslighting myself, and I would never have, or gaslighting myself that I need to get better, and it would be an infinite cycle. It was another reason I wanted to stop, and I feel this every time that I kind of feel like I'm like, I don't really feel very motivated in terms of learning Japanese today, and I would just almost feel like I'm gaslighting myself to keep going when I really don't need to keep going. I feel that because I feel like I don't need to keep going. And I'll get to a lot of things that did happen later in the week after after I recorded that video. Actually, by the time I uploaded it, I already thought this, but that happened later on, and it's essentially like I think I'm just starting to find some things in my personal life that's just like what the purpose of me learning Japanese actually, where it exists, like what is my purpose, and also how do I get like good at Japanese in accordance to what I'm doing in my life at the same time, because I think this is one thing that I am actually starting to kind of dislike about what immersion-based advocates usually say, and it's that, oh, you can learn a language no matter where you are, And I would like to say that is true, but I think your environment, especially if you're without gaslighting yourself, because learning Japanese just in the U.S. as just a generic American to do it successfully really requires yourself to like have to almost gaslight yourself into like I'm using the word gaslight a lot, but I really do mean it. Um, like convince yourself that like Japanese norms are your norm and to like that instead of doing anything what like an American or whatever your country is. That was like just what you normally do. And so being in that environment makes it easier to immerse because it's not just that it's around you, it's also that like it's you fall in love with that environment or those standards and you become used to those standards as a part of a simulation, I guess. That's a pretty big point of this video, and how why I've slowed down or decided to slow down Japanese. When I made that original video, or the first Japanese in me, and why I'm making this follow up of Japanese in me to the future, is because in that first video, I really set out to for like the milestone of like around on average 10 cards a day. And the problem with that is it actually ended up being too much, which disappointed me at first because that's like what I think immersion advocates usually say they want to do or say you should do. But let me get into this. Let me start with how I actually organized my like learning process, and that was I essentially organized it as in I had 3 tiers, and I would make a plan before I started the week. I would make a plan and basically be like, okay, I'm gonna dedicate myself to doing this much Japanese in this week, and I would have 3 different tiers of dedication, and that would be I would have the first tier of adding 0 cards, the second tier of adding 10 cards, and the third tier of adding 20 cards. And I was mandated. I told myself that I had to add both, or have in a given week, I had to have a day where I added 0, and I had to have a day that I added 20. And having a day that I added 0 was a day that I had a lot of stuff going on. A day I added 20 was a day I didn't have anything going on. And it would kind of assume this like neutral ground because of that. So, as a in accordance, I started with that plan, and I didn't even last a week. I set out that plan when I made that original video, and as I am saying here, in a day that it's the reason why it didn't work wasn't because of time. It wasn't because I didn't know myself well enough or something. It's because in a day I could have done 10, I just did not want to do it. There was a certain point of like, okay, I feel like the reasons that I put out myself to learn Japanese are not enough to feel natural immersing this much in accordance with how I'm currently living in my natural environment, because there is no really way. My natural environment doesn't really have like there's not a lot of Japanese people. There's a lot of international students where I go, but not Japanese specifically. There's a lot of Asian in the wider spectrum, but Asian and Japanese are 2 very different things. I don't have really. I'm lucky enough to have a Japanese roommate, but like that's not. He's Japanese American. It's not like I'm forced to be Japanese around him, and usually he just act American. So it's not like super. I guess like I don't really feel compelled to change myself to allow myself to immerse properly. Because I think, like, what immersion-based advocates like Matt vs. Japan and, what was his name? The guy who made AJAT, I don't even remember his name. like with how they, a large part of why they were able to immerse so much is because they kind of made an environment for themselves that they reject their outside environment almost is a part of being able to shelter yourself and learn so much Japanese. That's how I think that's where I learned about something I learned about myself recently, in that I am not able to do that. I used to be able to do that, but I am no longer able to do that. And that is because when I first started learning Japanese, I picked up Japanese during COVID. So already there wasn't a lot going on. I picked up, well, technically I had learned it before, but I really started during COVID. So already there wasn't a lot really going on. There was a lot that wasn't going on in terms of, not only in terms of the pandemic and not really talking to people and blah, 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 so I can kind of do my own thing, but there also, in my life in general, at the time, this is important, I didn't feel comfortable, or I didn't feel like I wanted to be in the in the state I was in. I was in a prime state to reject, which that is, I think, the very important part, is about how I was able to pick up a language so easily, is I was able to immerse myself so much because I was so rejectful of what I had currently. I was able to change myself to something else because I wanted something else. I think that's really the important part. Also, I don't want, actually, I just realized I don't want this here. I'll keep that. Maybe if I change my mind. I wasn't able to get myself to immerse to a level, or I was able to get myself to immerse to a level at the time because I didn't like a lot of the situations I was in. And I'll go into more detail just right here. First off, I don't think I was mentally that stable, to be honest. At the time, I was going off of I was going off of middle school, and middle school sucked for me. Really, and middle school sucks for everyone, but I think for me in particular, it sucked for me. And how I had this one really toxic friend. My grades were terrible. I felt kind of useless. My parents at the time were both having problems with unemployment and not really having money in the household. So I always kind of had the idea that I needed to do really well in myself if I wanted to go anywhere when I was younger. And I just cut myself off. And that idea really took me over and felt like I didn't belong in my current position that I was in. So, essentially, what happened is I was just like, okay, well, if I don't really feel like if I belong here, because I felt like my grades were doing bad, so I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna be successful here. Essentially, to be honest, the shortest way of saying this is I wanted to move to Japan. I was like, I definitely fell into Japanese romanticization. I definitely was like, this is just better. This life is just better. I think I was willing to overlook problems like working overtime and declining Japanese population and such for the a lot of the fact they have healthier food, the fact you can have transit, and just generally the more stable lifestyle that I think that is, in my opinion, pretty evident and pretty representative of Japan as a whole, of just a stable lifestyle that won't really change. And I just kind of I was kind of in a state of instability, so I was able to accept Japanese a lot easier because of that. And that's really my thesis of this, of my earlier portion of myself. I was able to accept learning Japanese a lot because it's I didn't even like my environment, so I was able to reject it. Japanese, and slowly over time, some of these problems started to go away. And it's funny, I actually kind of attribute me learning Japanese to these problems going away. As I mentioned, earlier, I felt as if my I mentioned my grades. Like my grades were not really good in middle school, and when I went into learning Japanese, I felt like that I was like, okay, if I'm not really doing well here, then why should I try at all? I'm like, or not really doing. If I'm not really doing well here, then I should probably try somewhere else. I think kind of my thought process back then, and actually because my Japanese like made me, I think, kind of fixed the problem with the reason why my grades kind of sucked, in that it gave me like a purpose just in life in general, and it made me a lot happier to try again, and that put me in a position of God actually made my grades better because it just like it made me care about a lot of things a lot more. It's it was really like an amazing transformation in my personal life. In terms of, I used to go from feeling like that like school is pointless and I don't really want to try because there's no point, blah blah blah, to going to like actually being pretty academically successful. From a pure academic standpoint, of course, that's that's all that matters. But it is a standpoint that does matter at least a little bit. So, and since, and also not to mention, my family started making more money again. A lot of things stabilized in my personal life, and me learning Japanese slowly started to kind of not have this original purpose anymore. It started more slowly started to transform just more into a hobby as time went on. A good hobby, but just a hobby. Not something, a hobby that is, at the end of the day, very difficult to successfully pull off. A hobby that a lot of people is attributed to being like, oh, that's just what weebs do, overconfident weebs do, that say they can learn an entire language and then they realize that it's really hard and they can't. I managed to surpass that through circumstantial situations, but it managed to get me out of that circumstantial situation, and it gave me a lot of pride that actually still exists to this day. So it's been it's been a while since that this was like 4 years ago now. This normalcy of being fine has kind of hit me to a point that like I feel like when I learn Japanese now, anytime, now I feel like my environment. Well, now my environment's good. Now my environment actually makes sense. I also go to a college that I really like. I have friends that I quite enjoy. There's not really. It would be like weird, as I mentioned in the previous video. I don't want to move to Japan in a large. I mentioned like practical reasons in my previous video, like oh their economy sucks, declining birth rates, blah blah. But to be honest, I feel like a good chunk of the reason me is honestly just because I don't want to change my environment again. I don't need to. I don't find happiness in that anymore. So it's just a lot of, I guess, purpose seeking. It's a lot of like me really. Anytime that I struggle in Japanese, I feel like it's just because it's like I already know what I know, and I already have gotten this far. And again, I just feel like there's no point. but, this gets me into, I think this gets me into pretty well into the reason why my past video does still stand in terms of its final decision, that I still do want to keep learning. Why is there a creeper? That's not good. Okay, so in the original video, I said I want to keep learning Japanese, and the reason why is because I get that emotional fluency, as I said earlier. But you might be like, okay, why is that emotional fluency still? Why do you have that desire still? Yet you're saying all this stuff about your environment not really fitting and all this stuff. So like, there's an error there. What conclusion did you come to? And I'll start with just some anecdotal things. First of all, like I already said, like the 0, 10, 20 card plan didn't work. I'm lowering it down to 0, 3, 5, which is significant. I think like 75% less. I feel like than my original plan. And The reason why I'm doing that is I want to keep, I don't want to quit Japanese. I don't. But at the same time, I know I do not have the capability to keep on having it go based on just purely, I guess, passion, or I'm not able to have it like the fervish fever of like doing 10, 20 cards a day like I used to, because it's gone. My purpose is gone, and my environment doesn't support it. And this actually puts me into I was looking into taking the JLPT, the N1, and just personal info. I live in Atlanta, and the N1 is not the N1, the JLPT period, all of the JLPT is not being offered in Atlanta this year or in December. Switch kind of threw me for a loop. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do now? Do I need to travel? Is it worth? And it really made me think that like, is it worth for me to travel to take the JLPT, especially the N1, which I have a mixed history with, and potentially fail, which there's more on the line because there's more expenses on the line and just work in general because I have to travel. And when I was in Atlanta, it was literally a bike ride away, but now it's like I have to try a little bit. There's some logistical things I have to figure out, etc., etc. I kind of came to the conclusion that it's not worth it, and the reason why is not out of some kind of anxiety thing. It's actually more of the reason is because I realized that I don't want to. I don't think I really have. I think that a healthier way of me approaching the JLPT N1 is for me to take. I actually want to do a study abroad in Japan, and then that would create an environment for me to kind of like want to learn Japanese even more because I'm willing to put myself into that environment. I just can't make it for myself anymore. That's the really the big that's really the big uh, takeaway of this video. I like Japanese and it's personal enough to me now. Now I've gone this far and just the personal history it has and significance it has to me that I'm willing to go to the lengths of like say going to Japan and etc. Unless not to mention study abroad's great. I'm a college student. Best time to do it, etc. I gotta make this jump. I don't know. That's another thing. But also, I I will be taking just English classes, and at first that kind of stung because I wanted to take Japanese classes at first, and yeah, again at first that stung, but I kind of think it's probably the better move because as much as I know Japanese subject differences, like for example Japanese math, and anyone who knows in the audience who actually knows Japanese, you'll know that math is like kind of completely different in Japanese, or like in general, there's a lot of technical words that like I think if I were to get like a long term master's would be worth learning, but in my current state, I don't really see the point of doing that. So it's not something I wish to wish to bother with. And also like I am taking classes, so I would like want my credits to transfer properly, and if I'm doing something that's more connected with my university that's in English, then it would just be a lot easier. And at first, I was always wary of doing a study abroad in English because then that would mean I'm like, oh, I'm going to be in an English bubble. But I feel like the Japanese ability I do have genuinely, if I work out of that English bubble, out of that comfortable environment, that is an environment I am willing to work out of because I know there is other promising or another environment that will work for me outside of it. Then I'll be fine. And what that means is when I'm in Japan, I'll be able to actually be willing or more motivated to study full time again. Like, or not, I call it full time, but like full stop, like all the way. And that will put me in a position to really be good again. And I'm doing this in a way of willing to, and I also am still technically learning right now. I would like to point out, while it is weak, yes, it is still there. I thought about, just quick side comment, I thought about taking the N2, but I just had for like certification purposes, but I feel like, I don't know, I don't want to be defined by a test, and also not to mention, the N2 means literally nothing the second I pass the N1, so I feel like I'd be wasting a lot of time in doing that. I understand the argument of like, oh, I should go out there and just like try new things and such like that, but I think in specific with I think that's true for like literally anything else, which is also why I am trying to learn, trying to learn Chinese, because it's just something else that I am trying new. But like with Japanese specifically, I have a lot of history of stress, like putting myself up to high standards, and that just screws up a lot of things. It would be really nice to not have to have that stress and be able to like dedicate myself to something else for once. I think if I'm like dedicatedly chill with my Japanese now, then that will be a lot more sustainable for the future, because how I am currently is like I like be like I need to learn be doing this much and this much cards, but since I'm not actually capable of doing that, I end up overextending myself and I kind of implode. And then I stop doing any Japanese, and then for a long like a multiple months I'm like, oh, I need to start redoing cards again and blah blah blah, and then I end up doing like I guess like there's 2 days I do like 20 cars, and then I completely stop, and it's way slower and way more inefficient than just doing I think a plan of like 3 5 cards. I actually have a lot to look forward to in the next semester coming up, and I think this ends this video. If you watched to the end, thank you, and also if you didn't watch the first video and you did enjoy this video, I would say go watch the first video, but do keep in mind with what I'm saying now. I don't think the first video is wrong, but it is not exactly what I sought out for. I think not exactly the tone. So this video is kind of replacing it in that way. I would also like to add real quick, as this is something I'm kind of started to think about right after I like stopped recording, but I don't want to suggest that in order to learn Japanese, you have to basically like gaslight yourself out of being in a certain type of environment. I don't think that. I do think that that's kind of how immersion based learners, though, in like the 20, or at least during the early 2020s, when that I not early 2020s, 2024, not yeah, but at least like how the ones that kind of content that I consumed did almost didn't want you to do that. The reason why immersion based learning is so difficult, though, to really dedicate yourself onto, especially languages foreign as Japanese, is that I do think that you have to kind of fit a balance between what you want to accept from a foreign culture and what you want to accept in your own. And in order to do the speed that I had before, I had to basically reject what I had on my own. So I really want to emphasize that speed is important. The Japanese community online has a really bad problem of like emphasizing just absolute speed and not really getting into the just learning Japanese in a healthy way. I think in a slower way. That's kind of what I'm transformed to now. So yeah, it's not impossible. I think in order to learn Japanese, you don't have to gaslight yourself and reject your current way of living. It is easier to reject to be faster. That is all I was saying. And for some people, the amount of time that you have to take, that it takes to, it's too long in terms of to not reject and just go slowly over time. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add. Thank you. For real, thank you.